access. You will have access to the recording and to the presentation in a follow-up email, along with some other resources to support you. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat and we will go over questions. We'll have some time at the end of the webinar and we'll be able to go over any of your questions. So feel free to do that. Our agenda today will be the housekeeping and logistics that I just kind of went over. We're going to go through an ESSER funding overview and a timeline, some considerations for planning, Bluum's ESSER funding support process, and information about ESSER funding and options, ESSER and funding options. Before we begin, we'd like to take some time to send a big thank you to our sponsors who enable us to provide webinars like these free of charge to our educational partners. Avid, Legrand, Smart, and Google all believe in the power of strategic planning to maximize the impact and sustainability of ESSER investments, and we're so grateful for their partnership. I'd like to now introduce our speakers for this afternoon. My name is Sarah Babay. I serve as Bluum's Education Services Coordinator. I'm going to turn it over to two of the members of our Education Services team here at Bluum, Dr. Andrea Tejedor and Eureka Meziab. Dr. Andrea is a former Assistant Superintendent who has joined Bluum as the Director of Advisory Services, and Eureka, who has joined Bluum as Bluum's Grants Funding and Funding Specialist, comes from a background of grant making, federal, state, and local COVID relief funds to high impact projects and programs. I will pass it over to you now, Eureka.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Bluum's mission is to improve learning and make it more accessible. The reality of accessible learning is that it often comes at a cost. Currently, the nation is at the tail end of a once-in-a-generation school funding injection through COVID-19. I know you're well aware of that. And this funding has totaled around $190 billion committed federally. It's gone through some installments, and it is one of the most unrestricted investments in educational technology, health and safety equipment, infrastructure, facility upgrades, and staffing, of course. Next slide. And we're here today to discuss an announcement that was made on September 18th by the U.S. Department of Education, announcing a general liquidation extension for your ESSER funds through CARES and ARP. As you may be aware, there has been several liquidation extensions for past ESSER funds, and this is specifically an extension for the ARP. ESSER III. And next slide, we'll talk about what this actually means. So what does liquidate mean? So a liquidation requirement or deadline is when you can draw down that fund and spend it. So currently there was a 120-day extension for the liquidation. So it'll be currently it's January of 2025, but the Department of Education is allowing extensions filed by the state for a liquidation deadline extension. So that's the time that you'll have to spend those funds if approved. Next slide. What it doesn't mean, though, is the obligation deadline still remains September 30th, 2024. That's an obligation to obligate funds is to decide what you want to spend that you're funding for. So every state has its own obligation process. You may have filed forms or applications to your state to specify what you're spending your ESSER funding on, as well as any modifications or amendments that you might want to make to that obligation. So the obligation deadline still remains September 30th of 2024, and that is the deadline to obligate funds. There's no extensions there. Next, Sarah. Another blurb from the extension memo states must be requesting the liquidation extension for their ARP funds for themselves and their subgrantees. In this relationship, your school district is a subgrantee of the state. So there's no process for you to request your extension through the Department of Education. Everything has to be done by the states. And there may be an instance where states won't be allowing liquidation extensions, or they're not going to be requesting it on behalf of subgrantees. So you really want to check with your state ESSER representative to see if there is a pre-existing extension policy and procedures, or if they're planning on rolling out extensions for ARP liquidation extensions. So the current timeline looks like this. ESSER III has so right now ESSER II deadlines are rolling out. You're past that, so everything that from now to September of 2024 is all ESSER III funding. So right now is a time to strategically plan your investments of how you want to spend down your ESSER III funds. The obligation deadline remains, as we said, September 30th of 2024, and the current liquidation deadline is January 28th, 2025. That's 120 days from the obligation deadline. If your state does have a process to submit liquidation extensions, this timeline would be extended up to 14 months to liquidate your funds. So you can see spending well into 2026. Now I'll pass it over to Andrea to talk about our ESSER planning and how we can support you there.
Thanks so much, Eureka. Yeah, so we've been really talking about where school districts are at this point with their funding for ESSER and the usage of funds. And many school districts are starting to reevaluate the use of ESSER funds for the remaining funding that they have access to. When planning for any initiative that's supported with technology of any kind, whether it's ESSER funds and beyond, there's some key considerations that the district should be looking into, and they're outlined on this slide. One is understanding the future landscape around ESSER, but as long-term, in order to answer the question, how do we maintain and sustain what it is we implemented? What worked that we use our ESSER funds to support? And based on that, what do we need to figure out how to sustain moving forward? And then conducting a joint ESSER and EdTech assessment. How have we already used ESSER funds? What are the challenges the district or school is having with executing the initial plan? And is there an opportunity to amend that plan and reallocate those funds? And then defining priorities and having a justification for the change in funds. Once you've conducted an assessment, you can identify where there are opportunities and then prioritize the areas to be funded. And lastly, ongoing support and guidance. Who do you learn from? Where can you go for information? And who's a trustworthy thought partner that you can discuss your options with? So we'll go through that now. So in terms of the funding landscape, Eureka just went through the change in legislation and how states can request an extension and how you can work with your state Department of Education to request that extension. But understanding the funding landscape around ESSER is one part of this, but also understanding, as I said, that long-term financial landscape for your school or district. What other funds are available beyond ESSER once we've expended all of those? How do you design and implement solutions that contribute to that long-term economic viability and solutions that work well over time? Many states have other funding programs that will complement ESSER, and even looking at different aspects of funding. For instance, the Stronger Connections grant for mental health services. There's options out there that will help you really extend those initiatives or or support those initiatives that you've started that have been successful for the long term. And when is the last time you actually conducted a technology audit? Not just of the hardware, but of software, professional learning, your refresh cycles, and financial planning. By conducting a joint ESSER and EdTech audit or assessment, you can gather these data in one place and identify how you have already used the ESSER funds and the challenges the district or schools are facing with executing that initial plan. There may be an opportunity to amend the plan and reallocate those funds. Using this assessment, we can provide you with a justification. So we want to define our priorities and provide strategic planning recommendations and justifications as a part of this process. Once you've conducted an assessment, you can identify where there are opportunities and prioritize the areas to be funded. Do you have a technology leadership team in the district? Are the members of the team a part of the strategic planning process, and will they be involved in defining the priorities? How will you present these findings to key decision makers in the district? Will that be the superintendent, the cabinet, the Board of Education? These are all things that you have to think about as you start to make adjustments to your initial planning. And strategically planning for design and the use of technology that increases flexibility, collaboration, and autonomy for students, and efficiencies for teachers. And then lastly, we talk about support and guidance, learning from trustworthy thought partners. Who are your trusted thought partners, both inside and outside of your school district? Can you collaborate with other district leaders to hear what challenges they've faced and how they've overcome them? Can you reach out to them for support and have those conversations? So we've come up with a process to support districts in looking at their ESSER funding, and if there's a need to reallocate those funds and to plan strategically for it, we are positioned to help you in the reevaluation of those funds. We work to make sure that investments meet the following criteria. They're sustainable, they're accessible, they're impactful, and they provide professional development for your staff. Let's take a look. So step one, we invite you to complete an assessment for ESSER funding allocation. That's the first step. After that assessment is done, we return a recommendation on how to prioritize your next investments and maximize the impact of those purchases on student outcomes. I should say that first step is done face-to-face. We actually collect the data with you. It's not done on your own. Okay, step three. Then we provide justification for the recommended technology class or category based on your district's budget and needs, which you can use to apply for funding or to reallocate ESSER funds. And then step four, we offer support and guidance in navigating the state-specific ESSER procedures. In addition to the service, we also offer a wide range of free grant funding advisory offerings, which Eureka will share with you on the final slide. So the total cost for the full service is $3,000, which includes everything we mentioned: access to the ESSER assessment, a 1-hour consultation with me or one of our education strategists, a data review, customized recommendations, and personalized justifications. The consultation with the grant advisor is always available at no cost. We'll share the URL for that landing page about the ESSER audit. And you can always reach out to education@bluum.com or grants@bluum.com for a quote or for additional information.
Thanks, Andrea.
Yep.
Well, I'm sure you're familiar with everything that ESSER covers, but I wanted to do a quick check-in. Due to the broad guidance of acceptable use of funds, studies have shown that public school districts have spent relief dollars in a wide array of initiatives, from increasing staff size, building new buildings, and providing stipends and bonuses to staff, technology, and mental health. I'm sure you have firsthand experience of spending down these ESSER funds, and each state has a different process. So we're here to work with you one-on-one to make sure that you are meeting your state's policies. Next slide, please. And as an overview of ESSER deadlines, as we discussed, we just wanted to take a look at all the 3 iterations of ESSER we have seen and the funding amounts. So nothing's really changed in this slide except for the spending deadline, or the liquidation deadline may be extended for 14 months if your state does go through with requesting ARP extensions. Next slide. So what is our courtesy grant services? We provide technical support through emails. You can email us about any grant that you are working with, and we'll ensure that you have alignment with your project and the grant is aligned, so we can answer those technical questions. Application review, we request that you send us your draft application review so we can make sure that you are aligning with the narrative section and the review criteria. We'll check for clarity. We're basically making sure that your application is strong and competitive when it's entered. We also offer the 15-minute one-on-one support where we meet with you to discuss any questions that you might have. So this is more hands-on learning and thinking with you to make sure that you have you're empowered to apply for grants and be competitive. Great.
Eureka and Andrea, we have some time now for questions. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat or raise a hand. I think I may have seen one during the presentation, but if not, there will be time that you can email us and reach out to ask questions as well. So feel free to do that too. A couple minutes if you have any. While we're pausing for questions, I'd like to take some time again to really thank our sponsors, Avid, Legrand, Smart, and Google, who enable us to provide these types of webinars. We'd also like to offer one Bluum ESSER assessment at no cost to an attendee of today's session. Just scan the QR code on this slide and then fill out the survey to be entered for a chance to win. You'll also receive a copy of this QR code along, like I said, with this recording and the presentation in a follow-up email coming later on today. So if we don't have any questions, I'd like to thank you again for joining us. And we are really glad that we were able to chat with you this afternoon. Have a great rest of your week.